Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. Today we're gonna be exploring within state parks all across the country. These experiences were sent in by viewers just like you. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going. Now, let's get into these creepy and unsettling state park stories that'll keep you up tonight. Oh, one last thing before we jump into these stories. Recently on a live stream I mentioned I was going to give away a $100 Amazon gift card to show my appreciation to you guys for supporting the swamp. All you have to do to enter this giveaway is follow me on Twitter. You can find the link to do so at the top of the description and in the pinned comment. Second, comment on this video that you follow me on Twitter and also what your favorite type of scary story is. 3. Be sure to like this video and be subscribed to the channel. Now, let's get into these creepy stories. The following story takes place in the fall of 2013 in Amicalola Falls State Park, Dawson County, Georgia. My friends, Sam, CJ, Laura, Montana, and Will decided to go on a camping trip that we had talked about doing for some time. So, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, we all met up at Sam's house, packed up enough camping essentials for a short one-night camping trip, and headed to the falls. The car ride over was filled with typical vulgar jokes and excitement for our impending camping adventure. At the time, we were all underage. We were all about 17 years old. However, CJ was 21, and we had him buy us some beer, and he also got a beer funnel. As we arrived at the location, it was already approaching sunset, so we did not have much time to set our tent up. The day was overcast, rainy, and cold. The dirt roads leading into these dense vegetations were very muddy and large puddles, forcing us to drive cautiously through the steep terrain within the state park. We realized that all of the normal campsites require reservations and were already completely occupied when we got there, so we were forced to take a road less traveled and find a clearing to set up our camping spot. Not exactly legal, but it's what we had to do. We found this location by a creek in a very secluded spot within the park. You couldn't hear or see any other campers for at least a mile in any direction. So, as daylight was dwindling, we quickly set up the tent, put our sleeping bags inside, and tried to light a fire with wet wood. And, as you can imagine, that didn't work all that well. So, as daylight was dwindling, we decided to explore the surrounding woods before it was completely dark out. We found a game trail that went deep into the woods over a hill. We figured there might be some other campsite nearby and maybe a cool vista to see the waterfalls within the park or surrounding mountains. Instead, what we found was quite alarming. Probably about no more than 200 yards from our campsite, down this game trail was an abandoned site with 3 tents and a small camper. All the tents, food, and drinks looked old and decayed, as if someone had just up and left, completely disregarding all of their own belongings. There was even a TV inside the camper, lots of food and water, so whoever had camped here had planned for being here quite a while. So why did they just up and leave everything? I had many questions in my head, and honestly, we didn't stay there for long to figure out why. We left shortly after discovering the site and told the others about our strange findings. I just wonder what force or thing would have driven a group of people to just up and leave all of their stuff and never return to come get it. Later that night, the rain stopped and we started boozing up and funneling beers. By around 2 a.m. we were all pretty trashed, and being high schoolers at the time, we were all lightweight drinkers, so it didn't take much to get us drunk. Sometime in the night, I woke up in the tent alone, in a state of confusion. I panicked a little bit, realizing my other 5 friends were missing. I soon came to my senses that I had blacked out from drinking too much and ended up peeing myself because my shorts were soaked. I managed to muster up the courage to leave the tent only to find the rest of my friends in Sam's car. The 2 girls, Laura and Montana, were still awake when I walked up to the car. They reluctantly let me in. I asked them why they left the tent. After all, I only peed my pants a little, and it wasn't enough to get the rest of the tent wet. They proceeded to tell me that once CJ, Will, Sam, and I had fallen asleep, they had heard whispering and voices crunching leaves only feet from our tent, but when they investigated, there was nothing there. When they realized, they woke up the boys and decided to shelter in the warm safety of the car with the doors locked. As for myself, I was too intoxicated to be woken up. They told me sometime after they left the tent and fled to the car that Will turned the lights on, as he thought he saw movement by the tent. Everyone watched in silence and in fear, anticipating someone or something to cross into the beams of the light, and after 2 minutes several quick-moving dark silhouettes moved in front of the car's headlights, causing everyone to scream in fear. Will told Sam that we needed to leave, but they couldn't just leave me in that tent by myself. The next day we woke up early in the morning and left that place. During the car ride back, they told me about everything that had happened, from me blacking out to the shadow figures and the voices they heard, preventing them from almost getting no sleep the entire night. To this day, we always refer to that night as both a fun and terrifying night that we will never forget. Years later, I come to find out that that area is rich in Native American history, and that many battles and small skirmishes had taken place near that place, including the state park having unmarked Native American burial grounds. I believe the location that we camped at must be near some of those burial grounds or a Native American battlefield. I can't say for certain if these spirits were of Native American descent or something entirely different, but I have no other way of explaining these events. Thank you for sharing my story. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, very close to Stone Mountain State Park. I am also an avid hiker, and I have hiked many miles in these mountains. There is a large number of granite boulders at the base of this mountain, some even as big as a small cabin. They have always been quite fascinating to me, and when you enter the wooded area where the boulders are, there is an eerie, quiet, seemingly void of wildlife feeling. My stories aren't as wild as some that I've heard on this channel, but I thought I would send them in anyway. The first story I wanted to share happened last year while hiking with my boyfriend and our dog. We had seen a couple of waterfalls that day and were going to hike to the lower falls. There had been very heavy rain for a few days, and I knew this trail had several creek crossings. I decided I didn't want to get wet and told my boyfriend to go on without me and I would wait. The falls were only another half-mile or so ahead. My boyfriend and dog go across the creek and disappear out of my line of sight. As soon as I couldn't see them anymore, I was suddenly aware of how quiet the woods were. No birds were chirping, no squirrels were rustling leaves. It was just completely silent. I don't usually get spooked, but all of a sudden I had this overwhelming feeling of dread. I felt as if something was watching me, and no matter what I did, I just could not shake this feeling. I had an urge to run after my boyfriend and started towards the creek when I saw him dashing back towards me. He too had an overwhelming sense of dread and didn't get 10 minutes down the trail before he turned back and ran to me. He said he couldn't shake the feeling of something was going to attack him or pounce on him. This was around 11 a.m. on a summer day, so not very likely a big cat or a bear would be out at this time. This second story I wanted to share was an incident that was very scary because I was alone with my dog. We were hiking the same section of Stone Mountain State Park, but a different trail called Wolf Rock. On the way up, I had seen many trees that were scorched but could have been due to lightning. I started getting an ominous feeling, so I started picking up my pace to head back. When I was about a half mile from my car, I heard what can only be described as a supersonic boom. It shook the ground and rattled the trees all around me. It spooked my dog and myself so bad that we ran almost all the way back to the car. This was a good mile or so down this trail. I tried later describing the sound to my boyfriend, but he has never heard anything like it. I've tried to hear sounds to compare, but nothing sounds the same. Not gunfire, not a plane, not a rock slide. I just can't seem to figure it out. While reading another person's story, though, it sparked my memory. They described the sound that they heard as a giant sledgehammer hitting a tin wall, if that makes any sense. That's the best way I can describe this noise. The metallic bang reverberating through the woods. Very, very unsettling. I know these stories weren't very long, or necessarily the scariest thing you've ever shared. My story takes place sometime in January this year. Me and my dad went camping in the Stoke State Park in Essex, New Jersey. We would stay there for a week and walk on many trails and go fishing. On the second day, we decided to go on a 6-mile trail and camp out halfway for the night. We started walking with no incident until my dad, up ahead, stopped and said, "Be quiet. Do you hear that? The woods are silent." This freaked me out, because my dad was a frequent hunter and never joked around like this. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up on end, and I felt like I was in danger, and something was watching me intently. Later, we found a little clearing to set camp up in, and I started to set up the tent, and my dad was making burgers. Once again, I felt uncomfortable out of nowhere, and even a little scared. I tried to brush it off and ignore it as best as I could. We ate and then went to sleep. I couldn't get any sleep and neither could my dad. That feeling just kept over us the entire night. Suddenly, this god-awful smell came upon us. We almost puked and retched. It was so bad. It was like getting punched in the face. It smelled like roadkill and garbage. We went back to sleep somehow, though, and woke up the next morning to find our portable grill moved a bit. It looked like something had dragged it across the campsite. I looked at my dad, and we both packed our things and quickly got out of there. Halfway back, we heard a blood-curdling scream like nothing we had ever heard before. My dad pulled out his .357 Magnum and shot a warning shot in the air to try to scare off whatever it was. We looked around, and then we both saw it. It looked like an 8-foot-tall man peeking out from behind a tree. It was covered in long, brown hair. It scared the crap out of me. We both ran back to my dad's car and floored it the heck out of there. Me and my dad were talking about it all the way home, and we made a promise to never tell anybody. If you should learn anything from my story, is to never let your guard down. And even though it's a heavily populated state, New Jersey has its fair share of creepy creatures. It may seem like the new horror cliché to tell a story about how the forest fell silent, but I've legitimately experienced this. Growing up in the Rocky Mountains, I spent most of my life outdoors and virtually always alone. During that time, I've been caught on the bad side of the keyhole on Long's Peak during a snowstorm and cut fire line on wildfires. But the only exceptionally strange experience I've ever had outdoors was on a trail run at Roxborough State Park a couple of years ago. Prior to my experience, I had run the Carpenter Peak Trail numerous times and never experienced anything similar to this. Not only that, I've also seen a black bear on a run just a couple of miles away. I startled the hell out of that bear, and it was the one that took off sprinting down the hill. Not to mention the fact that I've probably been stared at by mountain lions before. This time, though, something was profoundly different. As I was running up the trail, I reached the midpoint where the trail becomes heavily overgrown with scrub oak, and here is where things go silent. There were no animal noises. There was no wind, no airplanes, absolutely, dreadfully silent. But here's what no one else seems to relay. It felt like time itself stopped and I stepped into an electrostatic field. I kid you not. The atmosphere was heavy, and I knew that I just had to get out of there. It honestly felt like my soul was warning me that I had seconds to make it out of there, or I would not be making it out at all. Here's the strangest part though. I didn't necessarily feel like I was being watched by something, but rather that I was in some sort of trap or portal. Something felt profoundly wrong and unnerving. I sprinted my butt out of there as fast as I could. Luckily, I made it and reached a peak in record time. However, I wasn't out of the literal or metaphorical woods just yet. I had to run through this exact part of the trail on the return. On the way back, guess what? Nothing. Same exact area, albeit devoid of existential dread. That is what the unnerving feeling of the woods feels like. For anyone who has ever read Carlos Castanda's House of Leaves or Search and Rescue's Staircase in the Woods, I'd say this was the real-life genuine version of that. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, here's a bit of advice. What I did to safely extricate myself from the situation was to acknowledge the weirdness of the situation without becoming afraid of it. I was running because I was already on a trail run. Also, having tripped before, I didn't feel this situation was entirely unfamiliar. It's been a few years since this has happened to me, and I've had plenty of time to compare and contrast this to other strange cases from the woods. I'd say this phenomenon has been the cause of quite a few disappearances. Nothing about it felt benign. It was entirely predatory. If you're out in the woods, and especially out up in the mountains, please trust your gut. Even if it seems bizarre to sit down and meditate, we generally aren't taught to trust our extrasensory capabilities, and certainly not trained to use them. But I know beyond a shadow of a doubt they have served me well, and continue to do so. A few years ago, I had an experience that I don't know how to describe, other than something similar to the missing 411 stuff. I was in the mountains of western North Carolina doing fieldwork for a geology class I was taking in college, mostly getting a first-hand look at geological formations, like rocks and minerals, but also taking some samples to process in the lab back at school. A lot of our work was centered around the Blue Ridge Parkway, and as we were primarily making observations, we did a lot of hiking in national and state parks in the area. One of the days we went hiking on a trail that literally started on the side of the highway with the parking lot access across the road from the trailhead, so you had to play a real-life game of Frogger to get to the hiking because most of the cars were going around 60 and the road curved off into both directions. If I'm remembering correctly, it was about 40 to 50 minute hike from the highway to the summit. On the way back, with about 20 to 25 minutes left of walking, so about halfway, I had to stop to retie my boot so I wouldn't trip. It's important to note that we were a group of about 30 people, and I was at the very end with 3 other guys. The trail was only wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side for about 90% of the hike, so I wasn't necessarily in the middle of a crowd. The point where I stopped to tie my boot was at the bottom of a switchback that ran about 20 feet vertically up the slope, getting narrower as you approached the top of the section of the trail. I was facing the direction of the group, and had probably direct visibility for about 200 feet or so. While the trail behind me was just off to the right of my vision, about 5 feet up the slope, I had stopped right at the corner of the last turn coming down and stepped to the inside turn to keep the trail clear for people who could be coming up behind me. When I knelt down, I told the guys I was with I would catch up after tying my boot. The people coming up the slope were about 200 feet ahead of me, walking in my direction, but still coming around the turn at the end of the straightaway. Up the hill and off to my side, but technically behind me on the trail, about 10 linear feet away, was another 2 or 3 people coming down the trail as well, about 2 turns up the switchback. I did my business and then stood up. I'm going to take note here and emphasize it. I did not change the direction I was facing at any point until I stood up. When I stood up, I noticed a couple of things. The very obvious trail was now gone and replaced with grass, fallen branches and brush, and more eerily, there were no people ahead of me or beside me. There were no switchbacks going uphill. It was all vaguely level though, but somehow uneven. And there was no sound. No birds, no wind, no squirrels, no forest noises of any kind. This was very odd, but I, at first, chalked it up to possibly turning when I stood up without realizing it. And then it happened. The sensation. This unshakable feeling that I was being watched. That something was coming to get me. I started panicking and looking around more fervently to get my bearings, but nothing looked familiar. The feeling of being watched grew into a feeling that whatever was watching me wished to cause me harm and was radiating extreme feelings of hate, violence, and general evil towards me. The sensation that it was approaching grew, as if it had gone from creeping along to slowly walking to full-on running at me. Not knowing what else to do, I took off at the fastest sprint my terrified body could muster in the direction, all while racking my brain to figure out what had just happened. Eventually, I busted out of the tree line and onto the trail, right into the middle of my group of classmates. Of particular note was that they were now within 30 feet of the trailhead, and you could clearly see the highway and parking lot on the opposite side of it. As I said, this was another 20 to 25 minutes down the trail from where I stopped to tie my boots. But the whole experience seemed to take no more than 5 minutes in total. Everyone had asked me what had happened, and I merely stated that I was lost, and somehow I ended up here. I didn't know how else to explain or describe what had happened, and I still don't know what exactly did happen. To this day, I won't go into the woods by myself though, not even past the tree line of my parents' land, despite being in view of the house and the neighbors' houses, which aren't too far from my parents. I just can't trust the woods after that day. A friend and I were spending a beautiful Saturday geocaching in a few of Kentucky's state parks. Our GPS started to not work as we were leaving Carter Cave, and we were looking for a lake. I'm not sure what the name of the lake was, I don't remember anymore. In order to find the next cache, we had to go there, but we never ended up finding this lake. We were going down these little roads barely big enough for one car. Our car got chased by a pack of huge dogs and we're driving by these little metal shacks that made me think of Wrong Turn and Hills Have Eyes and all of those movies that warn people to never leave the real road. Somehow, we wound up far in eastern Kentucky, close to the West Virginia border. Before we hit that border, I happened to glance out my window. Of course, it was dark out, so I couldn't see too much, and my friend was beginning to panic because we were in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have any GPS and the fuel tank was about to hit empty. The moon was bright and full, and then, in the center of what looked to be a cornfield, was this huge stone monolith. I have no idea exactly what it was. I turned to my friend and asked, "What the heck is that?" He sped up and didn't say a word. We were following all these strange signs and things that looked like they hadn't been updated since 1902, and the road took us straight into a place called Huntington, West Virginia. I have not been able to find it since. Has anybody ever seen a monolith like this? I have done Google searches, Google Earth, etc., and I have not been able to find anything or any mention of what I saw that night. The closest thing I can find is the Stonehenge over in the UK, but I know that's not what this was. Thanks for listening to these creepy and unsettling state park stories. I don't know about you guys, but if I was hiking in a state park and the forest went dead silent, I would just run right out of there. I don't even know how I would react. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a state park story or something else, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. It would be awesome to share your story in a future video. It's stories from viewers just like you that keep this show going. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Become part of the swamp today. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video. I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. You're not going to want to miss these. As I said in the beginning of this video, I promised I would be giving away a $100 Amazon gift card. If you guys want to win that gift card, all you have to do is 1. Follow me on Twitter. The link will be at the top of the description. 2. Like this video and subscribe. 3. Be sure to comment down below that you followed me on Twitter, subscribed, liked the video, and tell me your favorite type of scary story. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting the swamp the way you do. I couldn't do this without you guys. I really hope this giveaway does show that I do appreciate you guys. I will be giving away more than one, so don't worry. There will be a fair chance for everyone to potentially win something. If you're unaware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you listen to podcasts on the internet. Thank you guys as always for supporting the swamp. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.